How do people do YouTube? This is stressful. Hello and welcome to a lengthy seminar starring my very rambly and sometimes boring design process. Welcome. So in this presentation, I'll be discussing my design process at length, and then I'll be addressing how core components from other design processes from cross, polyart and gestalt have relevance to my own. What I discovered when undertaking further research into my design process methods was that there was no one process that could accurately answer every single brief. Methodologies produced by established designers and academics are constructed kind of with the intention of being used in isolation. This means that basically it's impossible that one model is sufficient to produce a design outcome for every single circumstance. So when kind of reflecting on the numerous projects that I've worked on and using these to elicit an understanding of how I work, I was able to identify 3 key sections within my process. When looking at it with a kind of high level scope, so just pulling right back and looking at it in its full form, it appears a bit generalized and quite widely applicable, but the smaller steps that you'll see later in my process indicate that there's a pathway that's much more applicable to just me. So my process is as follows. It comes in 3 stages, as I just said: research, development, and arrival. So in the first stage, research, deconstructing the brief is key. For me, this first stage includes a lot of mind mapping, reading and then rereading the brief, and kind of scouring the internet, books, magazines, Behance, Pinterest, all those kind of types of resources that we have access to. It involves me scouring all of them and getting a whole load of inspiration. Usually I'll have a Pinterest board specifically for the project that I'm working on, and I'll just pin stuff from all over the internet on there, and then that kind of helps to build a mood board later in InDesign where I'll kind of collate it all together. This stage also includes basic outlines for fonts, paper sizes and colours. Usually when I mind map, there'll be phrases coming off the mid circle of the mind map, I suppose, kind of like saying bulky sans serif, not really any other descriptors other than that. Or fluoro orange and fluoro green, I want my eyes to burn. Stuff like that. They're not uncommon for me to use, just to kind of help build up the essence of the project, I suppose. When I am mood boarding and I am pinning and I am scrolling the internet, if I do find a typeface, typography is quite important to me as a designer. So when I am working and when I do find a typeface, it's usually that is kind of one of the core building blocks for me when I'm working on a design. If I find a typeface, that really helps me develop the aesthetic further. So that's often a really important aspect in the research stage for me. And I also engage in something called inductive thinking, which means I don't kind of have a predetermined direction, and I let the ideas emerge organically through viewing of similar projects on Pinterest and Behance and things like that. I kind of let the ongoing process determine the outcome of the design. I don't have one strict premeditated design that I'm going to go for. So the next stage, development, this usually involves, as a kind of overarching idea, fleshing out the idea. So this stage often includes sketching, forging a link between my hand and my brain, or my brain and my hand, and then moving on to InDesign, Illustrator, or any of the other Adobe Suite products. It also involves so much iterative design. Like, I cannot explain the amount of iteration that I do during the development stage. This is a stage where sketching ensues. I aim to kind of get every idea that I have out onto paper, just to kind of get it out in the open. For me, this often is an idea to remove the stigmas of good and bad ideas, good and bad labels rather, as they may appear kind of better or worse in my mind. Getting them out on paper helps to visualize them in a different way, I suppose. It also allows me, sketching on paper and writing out all these ideas, to get rid of the actual bad ideas, so the ones that are truly bad, the ones that everyone has before landing on the one. By doing that and getting out all these ideas that are really, really simplistic, it allows me to just get rid of them. They're out of my system once I write them down. Otherwise, if I don't write them down, I usually kind of come back to them, and that's not what I want for my designs. I want them to be quite developed. Once they're out of my mind and on the paper in front of me, they kind of no longer sit as a viable answer to the brief. They're just there as a kind of surface level idea, and then usually once they're out, I'll dive deeper and push that idea a bit further, kind of try to really get something that's worth going for. Once this stage is over, once I've kind of sketched up a few little page layouts, I move on to InDesign and I'll crack on with some fonts, colors. Usually I'll try and get them out. I'll set up a grid, all that type of stuff. And this stage just becomes so iterative. Usually when I work in this developmental stage of my process, there's a lot of iterative design. As I said, I will often work in InDesign. If I'm working on a magazine or a book or something like that, I'll work in InDesign and I'll gradually, I'll make little changes here and there, but it's constant. The first idea that I have is never the best idea. I just realized I wasn't looking in the camera that whole time. So good, everyone. I love this. So the final stage in my design process, arrival, often includes questioning myself whether I've answered the brief accurately. Is there anything else I need to add? Is there another way I could have done something? My final design will include some abstract element from my first iteration. So whether it's a color or a typeface, even if the whole design that I've created is worlds away from my original iteration, my first iteration, it will still usually have one element of the original design in the final design. I don't know what it is, it's just kind of, I'll usually like something, and then as I work iteratively, whether it's the type or a color or layout or a structure, something will be included in the final design that was in the original. My process is quite non-linear, I suppose. I'll cycle back between the development and the arrival stages as well. I usually only spend a little bit of time at the research stage, but going back between the second and third stages is quite common, just so I can kind of build on my ideas a little bit more and flesh them out before kind of finally arriving, I suppose, at the final product. What do cross, polyar and gestalt add to my process? What I am able to incorporate into my design process via cross, I suppose, is the exploration stage. He really puts emphasis on doing a lot of research and exploring and kind of understanding what the actual project you're working on is. Recently over summer, I worked on a children's book for Hunter Water, and when doing that, it was for Aboriginal children, and Aboriginal children often throughout Australia have a lot of reading abilities, so there was a lot of thought that had to go into the typeface choice, the way that the text was laid out, the colours, how the text interacted with the images, and doing all of that research was really, it really allowed me to produce something of real note. A lot of work went into looking at other children's books written for regular children that have grown up with schooling, and then oftentimes looking at books that were written for Aboriginal children with native language and how they were compiled. When I was reflecting on my own process in comparison to Polya's, I did find it difficult to find similarities between them, but I was able to find some distinctions between them. His application of the word correct when considering a design does not fit in with the way that I design at all. I think there's multiple answers to the brief. So for him to use the word correct seems quite stiff in its meaning. He places a lot of emphasis on it as it is a maths equation. It does tend to precise meaning about it. There's no room for error when you're doing a maths equation. Recently, I took part in a competition for design projects 3, where we were designing a car decal for the uni's new fleet of electric vehicles. This competition positioned me as one of the 5 finalists. I didn't win, but I did finish as a joint runner-up with one of the other students and received commendation. The way that Polya's methodology doesn't apply to this is through, again, that use of the word correct. There was no one correct solution to the brief for the car decal, but there was seen as, I suppose, a better solution, the winner, but there was no one correct answer. Applying Polly's process in such a situation would have limited my creative output, I feel. It would have instructed that I come up with the perfect outcome for the design brief, and that's an impossible answer to have. Finally, the Gestalt theory. When applying this to my design process, or when considering it in conjunction with my own, it does resonate with me much more. The focus on the similarity within singular elements and the connection to aesthetics enables me to kind of produce work of note, and it allows me to easily apply the principles to my own work. So I recently designed a magazine for an assignment at university called Type Talks, and the focal point was a duo called Violaine and Jeremy, a French design couple who are very stylized in the work that they do. Very eccentric, very type driven, and very French. It has a certain je ne sais quoi about it. When I was trying to pay homage to their aesthetic, I really wanted to hone in on the essence that they have, so the eccentricity, the Frenchness, and I found myself applying multiple Gestalt principles without prior thought. It was just instinct for me to implement them within my work, and that's why I feel like it resonates with me so much more, because my work primarily is a lot of visual. As a graphic designer, as like everyone watching this video, it is primarily visual work, right? When I was designing this magazine, principles such as similarity and closure were easily incorporated into my work to ensure the aesthetic distinction, and using the Gestalt process of principle application allowed for complete clarity throughout the magazine. So every single page looked like it was from the same magazine, which it should have because it was part of a magazine. Being able to apply all of these principles within my work really enabled me to tie all of it together.